It all started on a crisp autumn afternoon in the small village of Villedieu, nestled in the rolling hills of France. I was working in my garage as usual, tinkering with an old Citroën when she walked in. Her name was Camille Lefebvre, and from the moment I laid eyes on her, I knew something was different. Camille was elegant, with a grace that matched the art she studied, history of French art, or so I had heard. She came from a well-known family in the village, and it was hard not to notice the way she carried herself, as if she belonged to a world far beyond the one I knew. But there she was, asking me to take a look at her car, her delicate hands clasped nervously around the steering wheel. "Excuse me, monsieur," she said, her voice soft and gentle. "My car seems to be acting up. Could you take a look?" I did my best to hide my surprise. "Of course, Mademoiselle Lefebvre. I'll take care of it." I worked quickly, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something important was about to happen. I had no idea at that moment that she would change my life. The one thing I knew about Camille was that she was engaged to a man named Julien Moreau, a university professor from Paris. He was the complete opposite of me, serious, stiff, and with a kind of authority that felt intimidating. He had his nose buried in books, and I could tell from the first time I saw him that he didn't understand the simple joys of life. He was far too wrapped up in his studies, leaving Camille to deal with the mundane things like car repairs. It wasn't long before I realized how deep the connection between Camille and Julien went. They were set to be married in a lavish ceremony, one that would have the entire village talking. But I couldn't help but wonder if she was really happy. Every time I saw them together, it was hard to miss the tension in her eyes. I was a mechanic, a man of simple pleasures, but I couldn't ignore the way my heart raced when Camille smiled at me. One day, as I was working on a particularly stubborn engine, I got an unexpected visitor. Albert Fournier, an old friend of mine, walked into the garage with a mischievous grin on his face. Albert wasn't your average genius. In fact, he was the village's most brilliant mathematician. But he didn't let that go to his head. He was humble, witty, and a bit of a prankster, always scheming to make life more interesting. "You know, Jack," Albert said, settling down on a stool in my garage, "I've been thinking about your situation with Mademoiselle Lefebvre." I raised an eyebrow. "What situation?" "You know what I mean. She's engaged to that stiff professor, and yet, I can tell you two have something more than just a mechanic-client relationship." I sighed. "I don't know what to do, Albert. I can't compete with Julien. He's everything I'm not." Albert grinned. "Well, I've been thinking, and I have a plan. It's time to show Camille what she's really missing. You need to prove that you're more than just a mechanic." Albert was full of ideas. First, he insisted I make Camille a custom car, something unique, something that would show her I had more than just tools in my hands. Then he roped in his friends, Henry, an artist with a flair for the dramatic, and Maurice, a master of languages who could charm anyone with his words. Together, we set to work. I rebuilt her car, adding personal touches that only someone who understood beauty in the simplest things could appreciate. Meanwhile, Henry helped me learn a few phrases of poetry to impress her, and Morris gave me tips on how to speak in a way that wasn't too mechanical, if you know what I mean. Albert's plan was simple: make Camille see me in a new light, as more than just the local mechanic. But I wasn't sure it would work. The moment I had been waiting for came when Camille agreed to meet me at the garage to see the car I had restored for her. When she saw it, her eyes widened, and for a moment, I felt like I had done something truly special. "Jacques," she said, her voice full of wonder. It's beautiful." I smiled, feeling a warmth spread through me. "I'm glad you like it, mademoiselle. I thought it would suit your style." As we stood there, admiring the car together, I realized something important. It wasn't just the car that mattered. It was the connection between us, the way she looked at me, the way she saw me as more than just a mechanic. Albert had another idea, a dinner party where I could show Camille a different side of myself, one that wasn't just about cars. With Henry's help, we prepared a delicious meal, and Morris worked his magic with the wine pairings. It was all set up perfectly, but the true test would be Camille's reaction. The evening went as planned. Julien was, as usual, absent-minded, caught up in his own world, while I did my best to be charming and thoughtful. I didn't know if it would be enough, but I had a feeling that something was changing. As the night wore on, Camille seemed to warm to me. She laughed at my jokes, and when I spoke about the simple pleasures of life, like fixing up an old car or enjoying a quiet evening with friends. Her eyes softened. It was a different side of me she hadn't seen before. Of course, things couldn't go perfectly. The next day, Julian arrived at the garage, and it was clear that he wasn't happy with what he saw. "Jacques," he said, his voice cold, "I know what you're doing. Stay away from Camille." I crossed my arms, trying to stay calm. "Julian, I'm not trying to steal her from you. But you need to understand that she's not happy." He glared at me for a moment before turning on his heel and leaving. It was a tense moment, but it didn't change my resolve. I wasn't going to back down. That afternoon, Camille came to the shop again, and this time she didn't hesitate. She walked straight up to me and took my hand. "Jacques, I've been thinking," she said. "You're right. Julian isn't the right person for me. He's a good man, but he doesn't make me feel alive." "You do." My heart skipped a beat. "Camille, I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," she whispered. "I know how I feel." From that moment on, everything changed. Camille and I spent more time together, exploring the village, enjoying simple pleasures like picnics in the park and walks along the river. It wasn't about grand gestures or expensive gifts. It was about being together, sharing moments that mattered. As for Julian, he eventually accepted that Camille had made her choice. He may not have been happy about it, but he knew there was nothing he could do. Albert was the first to congratulate me when Camille and I finally made it official. He had always believed in me, and it was a good feeling to know that I had his support. "I knew you'd win her over, Jacques," he said with a wink. "Sometimes all it takes is a little bit of love, a bit of charm, and of course, a good mechanic." And just like that, life in Villedieu went on. But for me, it was different now. I wasn't just the mechanic anymore. I was a man in love, and in the end, that made all the difference. Ready to improve your English in a fun and engaging way? Start learning through stories today. Subscribe to Learn with Godson and dive into captivating stories that will help you expand your vocabulary, understand sentence structures, and practice pronunciation. Stories make learning English exciting and memorable. Join us on this journey and watch your language skills grow with each story. The voiceover in this video is given by Learn with Godson. Copying or re-uploading is prohibited.